on what Kale misses in the story. Okay, go ahead.
All right, so a plane taking off from Los Angeles starts flying. It is taken over by a terrorist group, I'm assuming, and one of them holds a gun to a flight attendant's head, and it's a Magnum, and he basically takes the plane hostage. He goes to the pilot and he's like, I'm taking over this plane, and the pilot's like, okay, and the terrorist is like, you have to like tell everyone that everything's fine. And so he starts phoning Miami, which is where they're going, and he's like, everything's fine, and then he throws the little collar thing at the terrorist, and the terrorist falls backwards, and then the angry passengers tie him up or something, and the plane lands safely, and the terrorist is away.
Oh, awesome. So Kelly, you can sit down.
Oh,
Okay, now call the next person, and you guys are going to keep thinking about what they missed, but think about also what they remember. Zach, come on in. Okay, Matthew, you're going to tell Zach the same story you just heard.
Okay, so there was a plane leaving Los Angeles, and shoot, I forgot. So plane left Los Angeles, and as it was in the air, and there's a terrorist on board, and he held a gun to a flight attendant's head, and then flight attendant ran into the pilot, and then the terrorist told the pilot to phone to the people at the landing bay to tell them that everything was fine. Then the pilot threw the thing that he told them at the terrorist. Does that make sense? Yeah. Like the thing, so like he was calling the people, and then he threw that at the terrorist, and then the angry passengers came and attacked the terrorist and tied him up. They landed safely. Yeah.
All right.
Like the story. Okay.
Okay, last one. Oh, come on in. Okay, Zach, you're going to tell Zoe the same story.
All right. So there was a plane that left Los Angeles, and as they were on board, there was a terrorist on board. And he went and he threatened the flight attendant with a gun to their head, and he told them to bring him to the pilot. So they brought him to the pilot, and the pilot called to base saying, hey, there's a terrorist on board. And then, in a surprise twist of events, I guess, he threw the thing he was calling him with at the terrorist, and that apparently stopped the terrorist. And then all the people on board came up to the terrorist and tied up the terrorist, and they all lived happily ever after in their destination of Miami, supposedly.
Okay, great. All right, now Zach can sit down, and Zoe's going to tell the class the story.
the last thing I was expecting. Okay, so, all right, so there was this plane, right? It was in Miami. No. It was going to Miami. It was in a place. There's a plane going to Miami, and turns out there was terrorists on board. So he went up to the pilot. He went up to the cockpit and was like, "I need to talk to the pilot or something." Why is this so hard? And so he ended up talking to the pilot, and the pilot called help or something, and he heard the thing of the terrorist, and that stopped it.
All right. Awesome. Perfect. Okay, have a seat. I
so
told them not to react at all, just so you know. That's if you're like looking at a blank face and it's like, oh no. All right, I'm gonna read the story again. Okay. A TWA Boeing 747 had just taken off from Miami International Airport for Los Angeles when a passenger near the rear of the aircraft announced that the plane was being taken over by the People's Revolutionary Army for the liberation of the oppressed. The hijacker held a .357 Magnum to the head of Jack Swanson, a flight attendant, and forced him to open the cockpit door. There, the hijacker confronted the pilot, Jane Randall, and ordered her to change course for Cuba. The pilot radioed the Miami Air Traffic Control Center to report the situation, but then suddenly hurled the microphone at the hijacker. It's called a microphone currently. I just liked how everybody was like, I don't know, the thing, the thing. The hijacker fell backward through the open cockpit door and onto the floor, where angry passengers took over from there. The plane landed in Miami a few minutes later, and the hijacker was arrested. All right, tell me what we learned about the way memory works from this little demonstration. We'll move this way. Okay, so Ash.
You remember all the big, more important things and lots of different details.
Okay, good. So we're remembering the big, more important things. Like, which things in the story were those?
Like the main.
Yeah, like the plot points, really, right? I feel like we remembered the actions a lot better than we remembered the other stuff. Okay, Ashlyn?
As the story,
Yeah.
first we start that they're going to bring the
Yeah, it's really interesting because that has nothing to do with like who's telling the story. It has to do with the order. So there's something about the way that the story was written the first time that helped Cale retain more details, and the way that Cale said it, like helped Matthew retain a little bit more, but it went down in like the details, right, as we went, which is fascinating. Bridget?
It's like they're saying, like, it loses detail every time. It's like when Kale said it, like she got almost all the facts, like correct.
Uh-huh.
It was more vague. And then when Matthew told it, it was like even more vague. And then at that point, he started listening things entirely. And then by the time the last person told it, it was like barely like you could like kind of understand what's going on, but there was some.
Right, exactly. And so it was like first it went vague and then it started to go wrong. Like it was like, okay, the facts here, actually, Kel got a couple facts wrong, but for the most part, like the facts stayed, yeah, you called the pilot a he and the pilot was a she.
Okay. To be fair though, the big words that you read me about the plane specifically was not fun for me.
Yeah, right, exactly. So it's like, because your brain is focused on other things, you kind of fill in the gaps, right? Yeah, okay, good. Zoe.
I feel like when you're asked like scrambles, you just try to figure out what is like the best forgetting things and start shutting down.
Yeah.
That's what.
You had some test anxiety, right? Here you are standing in front of a group of people having to recall what happened exactly, and suddenly the panic sets in. Even though it's like this really low risk situation, it's just like how we react. Yeah, Keegan.
You only really remember the beginning and the end and the main action. Like almost everybody said like, even though like it got screwed up, but everyone said that it took off in LA, and then everyone said that angry passengers came and got the hijacker.
Yeah, right. Right, so like you remember, but it's like all of the conflict in between that gets scrambled, which I find fascinating too. Yeah, Peyton.
Some people's memory because Zachary told it exactly, like he didn't miss anything.
Interesting. Interesting.
It means that he was wrong, but he told it exactly how.
So it's like some of us are better at this kind of like rote memorization, and that is definitely true. It's why like there's such a controversy over like tests like the SAT, which they're like, it just proves what a great test taker are. It proves how great you are at memorization. It doesn't necessarily correspond to your skills in using those things, right? But Zach was like spot on with like even the phrasing of how he said things, right? Yeah.
Like as it goes on, a lot of people just start to jump from A to Z. Like they know the beginning and then they kind of just like skim over everything and just go straight to the end. Like at the very end, they've completely forgotten that the flight attendant was threatened at all, and it was just like the terrorists just wanted to see it.
Right, good. So we forget like we know how the conflict resolves, and so our brain starts to kind of fill in how we end up to that place, and so we just skip through the stuff that gets us there. Yeah, Maggie.
I think as it was going through, like the brain tried to like make it as simple as possible. Because like trying to remember every single detail, like what type of gun it was, what plane it was, like all the like the names and everything,
Yeah.
is like so then when you tell a story and you just say he and she, or they had gone, they had, it was playing, it's like, remember, like, it's super easy to remember those things, so it makes the story shorter, which makes it like, I don't know, like more vague, I guess.
Yeah, so Kale had a really hard job because there were all those details in the story, but if I had told the same story without the details, she might have been able to memorize it completely. Yeah, Zach?
I feel like when you're told a story, you kind of create like a mental image or like story of that
Mhm.
same story and kind of run through it in your own head, and then to understand it better. And when retelling, you're telling the story that you saved kind of in your own brain, which makes it a slightly different story. And
Yeah,
often you can fill in things you didn't catch, especially like gender. I used
Yeah.
a lot. It's like, well, it's just how you thought of it first, and that's how it is.
Zoe? Yeah, it's the anxiety of memorizing. Yeah. Kale and then to Maggie. No.
I noticed that I was trying to like figure out what
Uh-huh.
and then through the Swanson thing
Uh-huh.
that flight attendant, I watched a lot of flights. So that didn't, my mind started to wander.
Definitely. So those little details serve as more distractions because you're trying to fit them into some sort of mindscape that you have, right? Some frame of reference. But then while you're doing that, you've lost the other details that I've said since then. Yeah. Maggie?
To add on to Zach, I think when you hear a story, you put it in your perspective. So when you like hear a story, it's like you visualize it and you're like, oh, it's like I was there and I put it how I see it, and then when you tell it, you say it in your perspective. But then to add on to Kale's, it's like when she was saying it kind of relates to something else. I feel like when you hear a story, you relate it to your own life or to something that you've experienced or seen before, and that helps you remember it better.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So then along with that, like, let's think of the details that they all did remember. They all remembered that the passengers kind of like attacked the hijacker at the end, right? Hijacker with a Y? Who's the hijacker? It's right in front of me. Yeah, okay. We all remember that. What else did they remember? Peyton?
But they threw the microphone.
Okay, through the microphone, even though they didn't know what it was called, and I'm not even sure it's actually called a microphone, but they threw the microphone. They all remembered that particular detail. Anything else that they remembered? Yeah,
It was leaving from Las Vegas going to Miami.
they remembered Los Angeles,
Oh,
but they did
sorry.
remember for the most part Miami and Los Angeles as these destinations, right? Anything else that everyone remembered? Peyton? Everyone remembered the gun. Yeah. And okay. Oh yeah, Bridget. Everyone remembered that they were actually on a plane, right? Yeah. Good. All right. So we have these kind of details, right? That everybody remembered. So going back to Maggie's points about how this might fit into our perspective, why would those be details that everyone remembers then? Yeah, Peyton.
They're so violent and something like you don't hear about that.
Okay, good. So these ones, like this. Oh, I spelled through wrong. Sorry. There we go. These ones, because they're like highly emotional, this fits into our conversation last time about your earliest memories, which is that when you're young, you kind of attach an emotion to a certain event, and that helps you remember things. So this emotional stuff we're grabbing onto. Haley?
I feel like if it sounds more interesting, then it makes you want to remember it more.
Yeah, good. And violence is just inherently kind of interesting. So it's not necessarily about us having experience with a hijacker on a plane. Has anyone? Okay, yeah. I was like, really? No. Nobody has had experience with a hijacker on a plane, right? But that's the kind of stuff we're remembering because we're kind of like remembering the interesting, exciting bits. Maggie and then to Bridget.
I think there's also like the basics. There's like the plane is a basic thing that you know. Like
Okay, good.
everyone, like I've been on the plane before, but like if like some people haven't, I'm pretty sure, but like people talk about it, and so like hearing all those like side conversations and all that stuff, you
Yeah.
remember those things that
Yeah.
are like it's easy to like think of. Like names are hard, but you can like sometimes remember a face because like you're like, oh, they have brown hair and all that stuff.
Right.
It's just like easy to remember.
Right, and so like the fact that you remember the basic setting is because like we all have this familiarity, at least with that kind of setting. We all know that people were involved. We all know those basics. Bridger?
Just like when you're saying like when you're like driving down the road and see a car crash, you want to look and see what happens. You're not just like, oh, there's a car crash. Like if you're watching the news, if the cops not the government, like economy crash, as if you're talking about like a bomb that went off in the car.
Yeah.
In Israel, you know, oh, super interesting.
So it's like we're kind of sick, like we're kind of all voyeurs a little bit, and we all want to like see someone else's pain. We're interested in it, right? And it might be a kind of fear for ourselves. It might be just, who knows what the evolutionary reason is behind that, right? But I think you're right. Tell me this, why would they remember Miami and Los Angeles as names? Gail?
I was desperately trying to remember where they
At the very end, you remembered Miami. So you remembered these two names and you knew like this is going to be important because they're on a plane. So you're like, so I need to remember destinations.
I forgot.
Yes, you did forget Cuba. Jack?
I thought they'd remember them a lot, 'cause, like people are always talking about like whenever they talk about like California or Florida, like they're always like whenever you think of Florida or California, you think like Orlando, Miami, like Los Angeles.
Okay, good.
Places like that.
So these are kind of the most famous cities. If they were on a plane to Tupelo, maybe we wouldn't necessarily remember that name, but all of us have heard these city names so many different times. Yeah, Maggie.
I think it's like your brain almost has like a time frame. It's like I will remember these specific things and then that's it. Like
Yeah.
it's like you go through it and then you're like, I'll only remember what like I want, you know.
Yeah.
That would happen at this time and then I'll remember that, you know.
So we have a capacity and it's like we can only get to so many different things. Okay, tell me what we didn't remember. Like from the very first, what did Kale not remember? Yeah, Bridget. Oh, sorry, Brayden, sorry.
Like the order.
The order, yeah. Yeah, so these are the things that we remembered. We did not remember like the order of events and the order of when details were revealed, right? What else did we not remember? Ash? Oh, yeah, sorry. You've been raising your hand forever. Katie?
So like TWA.
Yeah. Boeing 747. You know, if I had read this story to my brother, who is in pilot training right now, he would have remembered that, right? I think for sure he would have been like, yeah, they were on a Boeing 747. But none of you are pilots. And so remembering that specific detail when it's like something maybe you haven't even heard of, like that's a familiar name to me, but I can't say what that means, that it's a Boeing 747, you know? Can't say the specifications of that plane. So it becomes really difficult to remember those details. Awesome. What about Cuba? Yeah, go Cuba. So if we're thinking that Miami and Los Angeles are very familiar and we're thinking about this as like a domestic flight, maybe Cuba is not as familiar to us, correct?
From what I witnessed, which is granted not all of it, it seemed like the intent of the actions were a lot less important than the actual events themselves.
Yeah, motivations and character development. Not so much, right? We're really interested in getting out those plot details.
And what we remember kind of shows our perspective again, because like the type of plane is irrelevant to us as long as it was just a plane. And Cuba is irrelevant to us because we don't live there. But
Yeah.
we live near Los Angeles and near Miami. So this also kind of puts like a bias on the story.
Yeah.
Because all of these things kind of like don't relate to us at all.
Totally. And I think the other thing that we missed that also reveals our bias is the gender. And the story specifically mixes up. It trades the gender that we are familiar with for these roles. So Jack Swanson is a flight attendant, and most often these days, not solely. When I was a kid, I feel like it was very, very rare to see a male flight attendant. But Still, it's like there are way more females in that position than males, right? Also, I have never been on a plane, and I have flown quite a bit. I've never been on a plane with a female pilot. Have you guys? You have? Couple of you, yeah, that's awesome. I never have. In my brother's flight training program, there's 15 of them and one girl, so it's 14 boys and one girl. So that also doesn't quite fit into our what we would call a schema. So we've kind of gone through life, and our brains unconsciously and consciously have been shaped to expect certain things. So when this stuff doesn't fit in with our expectations or our experience with the world, it might get skewed in some way. So we're talking about different like realities that happen with memory all the time. The first one is called leveling. Leveling is when we only remember really key things and we start to forget the details. But then there's something called sharpening too, which is that for details that are very important or very familiar, sorry, not important, but very familiar, we'll remember those for some reason. And they'll stick in our heads. Like sometimes with this story, someone will remember the Magnum. Kale remembered the Magnum first. But like sometimes that will go through the entire story. This time it was like the microphone. The pilot threw the microphone. That went through the whole story. And that's called sharpening, where certain things, once we narrow it down to a simple story, certain things will really stand out to us and that will retain. And then the third thing that is being described here is that we base our memories on meaning, not necessarily on details. So no one in here, well, actually, Zach said some of the exact same words as Kale, but for the most part, each storyteller was using their own sort of words to describe the story, right? None of them like used like memorization to say the exact order of words that were written in the short story. That seems like impossible for most people, you know? But everyone got the meaning of the story, the basic story, everyone could tell that thing. So a lot of times we base our memory on the meaning that we pull out of something rather than the actual facts of the thing that happened, right? And I'm hoping that we can see from there why we did this activity with this story. So let's all look at this story for a second. And even the title itself starts to talk about that. The truth of fact and the truth of fiction, or the truth of feeling. Both of those things are called truths. That somehow feeling and fact, even when they are opposite of each other, can both somehow be true. And I think that this corresponds to something that he says twice in his story. So in the first page, look at page 186. He introduces this concept to us. At the bottom of the first paragraph, he says, but there is still the past me, who would have been appalled to see his daughter lose her ability to spell, and I cannot deny that I am continuous with him. This idea of being continuous as a self is something that comes up a few times in this story. I thought I marked the second time. Let me find it in this very long story. Sorry, guys. There it is, page 207. So on 207, he's talking about how he has his earliest memories. And he says at the bottom of 207, it seemed to me that continuous video of my entire childhood would be full of facts, but devoid of feeling, simply because cameras couldn't capture the emotional dimension of events. And there's two more times in this where he talks about how he has a continuous self. Let me ask this question, sort of not thinking, well, thinking about the story, but not necessarily corresponding to the story. Do you feel like you are the same person now that you were when you were 5 years old? okay, a lot of you are shaking your heads, like, I'm not the same person I was when I was 5. How is that possible? Aren't you, I mean, you're still the same person, right? Like, you still have the same DNA, you still, how is it possible that you're not the same person, right?
You kind of like, you develop, you like, your brain's developing still. Like,
Okay,
it's still developing now, so like, you're, like, you don't know. And like, we like, gone to school and all that, and like, 5, you just remember how far, like,
yeah,
let's go play outside, like, but,
right,
you know, but then, once you learn more and develop more, like, now you can tell stories more detailed. Like, I think it all really depends on the age of how you see things.
okay, so you're a little kid and it seems like the world is all well and good and you can just go outside and play if you had a nice childhood, right? And that starts to get, you say, like, developed, almost like overwritten by new worries. Like, now you have homework and you have to think about that. Now you have to take the ACT. Now you have to think about that. And it starts to kind of like change how you react to certain things. Aspen?
I like what Maggie said, where she was talking how when you're little, you don't really think about real problems. You're just like, oh yeah, like whatever makes me happy. And then you grow up and you're like, oh, there's things that I have to worry about now.
So it's like this idea of ignorance being bliss.
Yeah.
So as you learn things, you become less and less blissful.
Yeah. And then
Okay.
the other thing is like people you surround yourself with, like maybe when you were little, you made play with like anybody, just kids. But then as you grow up, you realize, oh, I want to be out with people, and then you become those.
Yeah. Okay. So do you think then that I want to use 2 words here. Maggie is using the word develop, like you adapt, you change to new circumstances, new knowledge, right? Do you think that you're developing and like so that you still are the same person you were when you were 5, it's just like more complex? Or do you think that you are overwriting? Like you are overwriting who you were at 5 years old and now you are a totally new person? Haley?
I feel like the developing part, because like chain of events, they start getting more dramatic as we grow older, and it like forces us to mature more. Like we have no choice but to mature, or else things like aren't going to work out.
Okay.
very well.
But that doesn't mean that that younger self, that inner child, isn't still there.
It's still there,
Okay.
but like at heart, I feel, but like our outer self, like that everybody sees, can't see that inner child.
Yeah.
if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
That does make sense. Okay, Peyton.
I agree with her. When you're 5, you don't really know how to fake anything, so you just do it like purest form. It's not like if you do something wrong, you're gonna learn from it, stronger than it, but you don't have any like reference. Now, if you do something, so like if you leave the stove on when you're 5, your parents are just gonna be like, oh, yeah. But now if you leave it on,
This is about consequences and yeah, Doc.
I actually think it is more about change and development.
Okay.
I mean, I guess just what defines a person. I mean, if you think of your 5-year-old self, I mean, I have different like beliefs, hopes, desires, opinions, the way I act, the way I want to act, the people I look up to, the people I look down upon. Then can I really say it's the same person if all fundamental beliefs and core systems are both different?
Yeah, so it's kind of like, oh, I forgot what it's called, that ship paradox. They talk about it at the end of WandaVision. Do you remember this? It's like Theseus.
Oh, right. It's the one
Jesus
like
Christ.
you replace like you have the original ship and you replace parts that are broken. So eventually replace part of the ship with all of the old.
So is it still the same ship? Kind of that idea. And you're saying, no, it's gotta be, it's a different person now. Yeah. Okay, 2 more comments on this. I'm gonna go Ashton and then Ash. Oh, comments.
I think like as you grow up, you build on your like child self. Like for me, it was good to start it's basically like you start off like I'm sure a base template, and then you like build on top of that, add accessories.
Yeah. Okay, so there might be something down there at the very bottom then that is like the core of you and you've built everything on that. And if you were to remove that core of you, like the whole thing topples, right? But the part that maybe we see, the part that's more forefront, that's kind of the accessories and the tower that's been built on that little core. I get that. Yeah, Ash.
And how you see yourself,
Mhm.
that might change.
I love that. This is a perfect transition. So go to page 227 now in the story.
I feel like it's not just mentally either because we shed skin and like cells die.
Our cells are
On a daily
it's like
basis.
every how many days? Yeah,
So technically we're not the
we're
same.
not the same people. Yeah.
I was just saying, like, when you're younger, your parents don't tell you as much things as you get older, which totally changes. Because like when you're younger and you get in trouble, you don't have as bad as a consequence because you're just little. You don't know
Yeah,
what you're doing
yeah.
that much, and then once you're older, you actually know what you're doing and like what the consequences can be. It's really
Can completely change
Yeah.
what you want to do. Yeah. Okay, on 227, look at the second paragraph. It says, right now, each of us is a private oral culture. We rewrite our pasts to suit our needs and support the story we tell about ourselves. With our memories, we are guilty of a wig interpretation of our personal histories, seeing our former selves as steps toward our glorious present selves. This ties in with our discussion last time of your earliest memories. Your earliest memories supported your vision of who you are now. Like my earliest memory was swimming in the ocean and going around this little bend and me feeling like that little outcropping of rock was so huge that getting around it was this giant accomplishment. I felt so independent in that moment. And that fits in with who I like to see myself as now. I like to see myself as independent. I like to see myself as somebody who's like willing to take some chances, right? Kind of. I like to see myself as somebody who has lived in like different kinds of places. Like this was in American Samoa, so it's like, oh, this is a part of me that I like have not just always lived in Utah, right? And I've retained that memory, says this little section, because that ties in with myself. And he says, towards our glorious present selves. We see ourselves as former selves as steps towards our glorious present selves. So what do you think he's saying in that little section with the use of the word glorious? Why do you think he describes the identity of glorious?
Maybe that what our past, like how our past was, defines who we actually are. Because it like shaped and molded us to be the people that we are today.
Yeah,
Because everyone's unique in their own way.
right. Have you heard somebody say, like, I don't regret anything because the mistakes that I made have made me the person I am today? It's kind of that idea. Yeah, Lydia.
I think we all have a personal bias, so we don't have to pick up for us and like progressing us in a way, and so we're all like, oh yes, all of this was good because it's made me into the person I am today. Even these mistakes because I learned this or whatever, you're just like so prideful that we can't admit we've done in the past for something good
Yeah,
to benefit ourselves, if that makes sense.
it does. Maybe they did make us into the thing we are today. That's kind of like how the past and the present works, right? There's this kind of like chain of causation. This, caused this, and caused me to be who I am now. But maybe who you are now is not that great, right? Like maybe it could have been better if you had made different choices in the past. Maybe your self now would be even more glorious. But that's not the way we think, according to this narrator. He says, no, we are rewriting the past so it fits our needs so that we can see ourselves in the present as glorious. So I think the word prideful was a good word to use there. It kind of like we use memories and we use the past to boost our pride. Austin and then to Maggie, and then we're gonna move on.
I think another thing that is looking back at our past selves, we can see like kind of what human beings we were, and we see ourselves as improved. And a lot of people are super arrogant, and they're like, oh,
Yeah. So it's like this way of boosting up your arrogance, right? In some ways, though, that's like the coolest part of being people is that we are capable of that. Because if not, if all of us, and I think some of us with like real intense anxieties are not as capable of that. And I think it makes it so that like being able to rewrite the past is one of the privileges of being a human. Like you get to tell stories about yourself that explain why you are right here, right now. Like, I can tell a story about myself that leads to me becoming a teacher that validates all of the decisions I am making right now. And if I couldn't do that, it'd be a hard life to live. So it's great that I can give like meaning to my life through these memories. And through Remem, with this like new technology, he's really scared about how that's going to work, because you can't rewrite the past anymore. You see your mistakes in the past and you see how they've affected who you are now. And is there anything you can do about it then? Yeah, Maggie.
I also think like it's not just on you, it's also based on your surroundings too, which also can change a lot of things. Because I know when you're surrounded by good people, you make good, better decisions, you know, and then that can also like change your future, because whatever you do now like affects the past, but also affects what you're going to decide, which I think is a big deal of just developing and seeing where you are now and where
Right.
you are then.
Right, but you have to do that through the frame of your own perspective. And if you just have a video to watch, it's gonna get complicated when you know the truth. Yeah.
It's also a different person now than you were like a year even further back. And it's a lot easier to shift blame of things we've done onto what appears to be someone else. Easy to say, well, I was
Great
different
point.
back then. I wouldn't do that now. Or, it was a different time back then. It was just someone else. And it's easy to think in your brain, that wasn't me, it was someone else. I wouldn't do it again. Everything's fine, even though you did.
Right, but with Remem and with this idea that you are continuous, you're not going to be able to do that. You're going to have to own up to all your mistakes. And in some way, that's a good thing. In some way, that repairs his relationship with his daughter, or starts to. But in some ways, it's going to be a disaster. So that's what we're going to kind of look at for the last 7 minutes or so of class, 10 minutes or so of class, and then next time too. So I'm going to give you these worksheets. So this story is a little bit hard to break down thematically because there's the two different parts going on. There's the Jijingi part and the narrator's part. At the end, we learn that the narrator has been using the Jijingi story to tell the story of Remem. Kind of like the way that we use past stories to explain ourselves. But what makes that difficult then is that you've got two storylines going on at the same time, and they both have their own plot arc, and that means that the characters in them are both developing feelings about the new technology at the same time. So we're going to just work on the first page of this for the end of class, and obviously we'll not finish it. But what you're going to do is you're going to find, well, there's lists here, but you're going to find positive and negative effects of the new technology. So the new technology for Jijingi is writing, and the new technology for the narrator is Remem. And you're going to write down what are the positives of writing for Jijingi, what are the negatives of writing for Jijingi, and then do that with the narrator as well. And for each thing that you find, you're going to try and find two pieces of textual evidence. You don't have to write down the quotations. Here it says include page numbers and quotations. Let's just do the page numbers. So you're going to say, here's the positive, and then you're going to jot down the page numbers where you find evidence of that particular positive. Okay, does anyone have any questions about that part so far? You can work alone, or I think it would go way faster if you work with partners. So you can work with partners if you want to, but everyone's going to fill out one for themselves. Okay, I talked way longer than I thought I would, but you can have till the end of class for this to get started.